If statement, part 6, long argument. As I said in the last lesson, in this lesson we will have a very long if statement. It will have a lot of conditions. You have they are so long you have a scroller bar at the bottom. Basically, what we have here is we check if x is between the range of minimum width, maximum width, if y is in the minimum height, maximum height, and or debug is true. This doesn't say much. You can't understand what it does just from looking at it, but this scenario can happen. In this case, let me show you an image of what all of this means. We have an axis. The maximum of the y-axis is 500. The maximum of the x-axis is 500. The minimum of the x is 20. And the maximum of the y is 40. And we have a dot of x 22, y 50. And we have some rules. The x can't be below 20, meaning it can't be here. It also can't be above 500, the x value. On the x-axis, it can't be here. And also it needs to be below 40, which is here, and also can't be above 500. These are a lot of conditions to put inside of one if. I'll show you how to separate them, but first I want you to understand this. This can be anything from a graph where you need this area from 0 to 22 for UI, or to put UI here, or any other reason. Actually, in graphs there are other calculations, but for this example this will do it. It can also be a computer game where you have boundaries, where these are the boundaries. So this can be a lot of things. It can also be some data in database, maybe user input. When the user clicks here, it must be between inside this rectangle, between 20 to 500 and 40 to 500. Yeah, let's take a look at the code again. So here we have x is 22. By the way, you can also declare variables like this, and then have a comma, and then declare another int variable. You must first declare the type, which is int, and then we can declare a bunch of ints, like we have a few ints here. So we declare the x 22, the y 50, if you remember this one, this point, and then we declare the minimum width, which is 20, which is this here. It's this point. And the minimum height is 40. This one. And the maximum width is 500, and the maximum height is also 500. We can change this, but we will leave it as it is. And we have a boolean, which can be true or false, which is named debug. This is for a special case, like if we are debugging it, we can try and put a point here and see how it looks like, or here, even if it's outside of the bounds or range we check. So we change this to true, so we can check out points anywhere. So when this is true, all of this long argument will always return true, because it's debug. But when it's not debug, do the regular logical operation, check for if x and y is between the ranges. So as it is now, it's very hard to look at that, but you've already seen something like this. So here x is bigger or smaller than width. This is what we check here. If x is bigger or equals, not smaller, bigger or equals to the minimum width, which is 20, it's 22. And then we use the AND operation to check also if it's smaller than or equal to the max width. So it can be less than 500 or 500 because of the equal signs, or bigger than, not or, it can be between 20, the minimum width, and 500. So, which means anywhere between here to here. It can't be here or here. So this is represented by this part. We put it in parentheses to separate it from the others. We also put big parentheses. You can see where it starts and where it ends. You have a white thing. You can see it. You can see the white on the other side here and here. So we put the one around the two ranges checks when we check the range of y, which is basically the same as x, but here we check another thing. We don't check for the x-axis, we check for the y-axis, which is this one. Same thing, we check if it's between 40 and 500 or 40 or 500 because of the equal sign. So we also put it in parentheses to separate it from the others, and we put and because we want to check all of this and all of this. And we have an OR debug. So basically what this means, if all of this returns true and this is false, it passed. Or if all of this is false and this is true, it still passes. In our case it's perfect because we want it to pass if debug is true. So this can fail, but it will still pass because maybe we want to check if we can put a point here or here or here outside of the bounds, maybe here. So this is very useful for us in this specific case. You can create almost an infinite amount of arguments, logical arguments. But this is just a simple case to demonstrate how you use a really big one. It's not very common in programming, but you will meet this kind of thing. So this is very messy. It's a big mess to look at. We can separate it to booleans. So let's check let's create a few booleans and put those arguments inside of them. So they will hold the results of this check. Let's do it in a variable instead of just dropping it in one line. Let's call it width range. Let's call it in width range. So when we look at it, we know what does it checks for. If x is within, let's add x in width range. Let's paste it. And also let's put it in parentheses in case we want to add stuff to it or whatever we want to do with it, so it will separate it from any other arguments. So as you can see here, I put it inside of parentheses, so it's separated from the other arguments. So meaning, first it will check what's inside the parentheses before it does something else, or it won't do it as... first it will do this before it checks everything else, and then it will do this argument, and when this returns true or false, and this returns true or false, it can check for this end. So if this is, let's say, true, and this is true, so it will return true if you remember the truth table. And then, because we separated it also with parentheses, that big argument, we can easily check the next one, this or sign. So that way you can layer your argument if you need to. So we can take this and put it here instead. Now it's a little bit more readable. So here we check if x in range, and let's make another one for this. I will press enter before the semicolon, so we can create another variable. We will call it y in h range. Let's see what's the error. Cannot be resolved as a variable. We forgot the comma. Let's make it more readable. So here we can now put it here, and this is much more readable. You don't need these parentheses. So here it checks if x is in the width range, the minimum width and maximum width. And here, it didn't copy it. Let's get rid of that. Now we can see it better. If x is within the width range and y is between the height range, or debug. So this is much more readable. If you want to see what this does, you look at it here. If you want to see what this does, you then look at it here. And the debug is just, true or false. This is hard-coded. We can change it to true or false to check the result. So let's check it, for ourselves before we run it. So x is 22, so this is 22. And the mean width is 20. So 22 is bigger or equals to mean width. Yeah, it's bigger, so this side is true. X is smaller than the max width. The max width is 500, so yeah, it's smaller than the max width. So x in range will be true. Let's check if y is in range. Y is 50, which is bigger than the mean height, 40. And y is also smaller than 500, which is the max height. So in y in height range is also true. So true and true is true. So all of this is true. And now we have our debug. Debug is false. True or false is true. So it will get inside the curly brackets, the execute, and will run do something. The do something can be anything, like change the x value or the y value or whatever. In our case, we just try to do something because we don't want to get into, too much details. So now let's do it 501. The y is 501. Now it will say fail test. Why? because now y is not smaller or equals to max height. It's not 500 and it's not below 500. So this will be false, and this part is true, so true and false will return false. And now when we check, this one is still true, and this one is false, so false and false is false, false and now all of this is false. False or false will be false. But if we change the debug to true, we want to check this value anyway, we don't care. So it will enter here, do something, as you can see. So false or true is true. Let's return it to false. This can be done with, we can do this with y2, let's say, this big number. It will again return failed test, because now x is much bigger than the max width. It's no longer smaller than the max width, which is 500. So this test will return false, and all of this will return false, and this is false too, so false or false, it's false, so it will go to the else. Let's delete this. But if we again change this to true, it will go to do something. And this is basically how you create a long argument, and how you make it more readable than something huge. You cut it into chunks and then put it all together. We can also put all this big thing, what's in the if, and inside another boolean, but that's okay. If it was bigger, I would have separated it again and create more booleans, so it will be more readable. So yeah, I showed you, it's not a basic example, it's a more complex one. I just wanted to show you how the syntax is used with a bigger problem. You still don't have to understand it. You will see me use it throughout this course, the truth table. And maybe you will practice it yourself, and you will start getting how it works. If you still run into any problems, you can always contact me via the Q&A. And that's it for this lesson.